the head of the Gemara. So we learned yesterday there was a machlokes. There was a machlokes if the lachem and the kivsei atzeres are ma'akvin ze'eseh. There was such a machlokes. However, Rav Yochanan told us all the way at the bottom of Daf Mem Heyamad Beis that a koil moedim coming on to Mem Vav Amar Aleph shem huskaku zelazeh, if they were already crystallized as a unit, shema akvin ze'eseh ve'ezeh hu zika shalahen shchita. What binds them together? It's the shchita. And once there's a shchita there, now if the bread goes missing or if the carbon goes missing, everything's possible. Amar Ula, Bo b'Marava. In Marava, they had the following shaila. Tenufa oisazika or eina oisazika. Before the shchita is done, there's a tenufa done with the live animal and the breads. As we learned in the psukim yesterday, which is where we learn equal from, it says v'heinef hakoynoisam al lechem habikurim. The karbanos were lifted together with the lechem. Tenufa lafnei Hashem al shnei kavasim kodesh yiyu l'Hashem lakoyin. That was the whole discussion. Is the yiyu, which is a lashon of ma'akev, is it going on to breads? Is it going on to kvasim? But at the end of the day, the tenufa is what starts the whole motion off for the whole avodah. So maybe the tenufa should connect them. And therefore, if one of them goes missing even before the shechita, but after the tenufa, it should still pass all the carbon. Zog to Gemara, let's be poished this shaila from the same Rabbi Yochanan. The Yom Rabbi Yochanan, shechita oisazika. Rabbi Yochanan said it's the shechita that makes the zika. Michlal, we could be medaik. The tenufa eina oisazika. If Rabbi Yochanan said that it's the shechita that makes the zika, and he didn't say the tenufa makes the zika, so it must be that the shechita makes the zika. Zog to Gemara, that's not a raya, because the Rabbi Yochanan gufa come aboyle. Maybe Rabbi Yochanan himself wasn't sure. Mifshit pshita loyle Rabbi Yochanan the shechita oisazika. He knew with certainty that the shechita does combine the carbon to the breads, so he knows the shechita oisazika. O tenufa ein oisazika, and tenufa does not make zika. Is he sure about that? Or maybe Rabbi Yochanan is unsure. He knows for sure that shechita does connect the lechem to the kvasim. So the reason why Rabbi Yochanan expressed that the shechita makes zika is because that's what he was sure about, and he's unsure about the tenufa. Zakt Gemara Teku. We seem to not be able to answer the shaila, and therefore we have to wait till Eliyahu Novi comes. Amalei Rabbi Yehuda bar Chanina l'Rafuna v'Rei Rabbi Yeshua. V'chiksiv kodesh yu l'Hashem l'Koyin. Kodesh yu l'Hashem l'Koyin is the pasuk we looked at a moment ago, which says that they're ma'akiv. That's after the tenufa. Basar tenufa ksiv. That's after the tenufa. Ufligi benanis v'Rabbi Kiva. Yet Rabbi Kiva and benanis argues about the yiyu in that pasuk. If the lachem is ma'akiv, if the carbon, if the behem is ma'akiv, according to this side of the shaila, that the tenufa binds them, that a pasuk doesn't make sense, because they're both ma'akiv once the tenufa occurs, if you hold that the tenufa makes zika. So therefore, from the pasuk alone, where this whole machlokes tanoim starts from, it would indicate that the tenufa does not make the zika. Fragt the Gemara ula temeich, basar tenufa v'loy basar shchita. According to what you're saying, what about the shchita? Bitmiya havadai the havadai de lakoyin lahave elalach shchita. We know for sure. It says in the pasuk lakoyin you, l'shem lakoyin you. When does the kohen get it? Not before the shchita. He only gets it after the shchita. So if that's the case, the pasuk is even speaking about lachish shchita as well. Nobody's going to say that shchita doesn't make zika. Elamai is lach l'meimer. How are you going to have to explain the pasuk when it says Lashem lakoyin you? You have to say that meikar kai. What it's saying is now we're holding before the shchita, or maybe after the Shehita, depending on if Tenufa or Zika. And the Torah is addressing things that eventually will become mutter to eat to the kohen. Elamai l'chlememer meikarakai umay kodesh yu l'Hashem l'kohen. What is the really we're speaking about before everything, even before the Tenufa? What does it mean kodesh yu l'Hashem l'kohen? It means davar shesoifay l'kohen. It means something that eventually, after the carbon is processed, it'll go to the kohen. Hachanami davar shesoifay l'kohen. So therefore, you could say that it's even the Tenufa that can make the Zika. Gewaltig. Zogt Gemara. Ushchita Oisha Zika. Our whole discussion today had been if the Tenufa will already make the Zika. But everybody agrees, it seems, that once the animal is shechted, now it's bound to these breads, and if anyone went missing, it would passel everything. Is that so sure? Are you so sure about that? Or we have a kasha. And Rashi tells us that now we are shifting gears and we're discussing the carbon taida. We know if someone brings a carbon taida, it's accompanied by 40 breads. Well, what if one of the breads broke? And Rashi tells us that the halach is if one of the breads break, it's possible. The bread is possible, it has to be complete, and we learned that from the lechem aponim. So what happens if one of the breads that was designated to be brought as the carbon taida breads, what if it broke? The halach is no big deal, because it's not yet bound to the carbon. Yavi lechem acher v'shoichet. You bring a different lechem to replace that lechem, because that lechem is not designated until the shechita. But mishe shachta nifras lachma. What happens if the carbon was shechted? So now the lechem is designated and connected to the carbon taida, and then the bread was broken, so now we have a problem with the carbon. Zok to Gemishna, Zok to Braisa, Hadam Yizarek. You could still make Zrikas Hadam to continue processing the carbon. V'abosar Yoichal, and you can eat the meat of the Toida, but Videi Nidra Lo Yotza. But you haven't filled your chiyuv to bring a carbon Toida, because the breads broke, the whole carbon is possible, and this carbon Toida now morphs into a carbon shlomim. So therefore it's a kosher, a carbon shlomim, but it's definitely not a carbon toida that you oblige yourself to bring. You're going to have to bring another carbon toida. V'alechem posel, and the lechem is posel, of course, because it broke. And you have to have all the lechem intact. What about nizor kadam? What if the zrikas adam of the carbon happened already, and then the bread became, one of the breads broke? So there, the halacha is Torah min hashalom ala paris. There, you could still give one of each of the. You have to give one of each of the types of breads to the kohen. So you could take a complete bread, give that to the kohen, not the broken bread, and everything will be good. The carbon will be good. What about ad shelo shachta yotza lachma? It didn't break. A different symptom occurred, and that it was yoytze from the azara. We know a carbon that's yoytze from the azara is possible, but this bread left azara before the shechita, before it was designated with the kedushas aguf as part of the carbon taida. So it's no problem. Machnisa v'shoichet, you bring it back in. But misha shachta yotza lachmo. What if one of the breads left, and it's not the azara that it left, or maybe it is the azara that it left. So once you shechted it and it left azara, so now it's possible with yoytze. So Hadam Yizarek v'abasa yoicho v'dei nidra layotza v'alechem posel, which is exactly the same halacha as if the bread had broken. The bread breaking and the bread leaving the azara are both psulim on the bread. What about nizrak hadam? Now, once the dam is nizrak, now this bread could be eaten in all of Yerushalayim, like a carbon taida. Nizrak hadam. Toirem mima shebefnim al shebechutz. What happens if the dam is nizrak and one of the breads left Yerushalayim? The halacha is you still have some other breads left, so you're toirem mima shebefnim al shebechutz. The bread that's given to the kohen is a bread that is still befnim. Okay, now we're going to talk about a third symptom that could have occurred. Ad shelo shachta nitma. What if one of the breads became tamei before the carbon was shechted? One bread became tamei. Maybe lachamacher v'shoichet because the bread's not yet connected to the carbon. But mishashachta is connected nitma lachma. So then Adam yizark va'abasar yoichel v'dei nidre yotza. You're yoichet another. You know what? Because the fact that the bread became tamei is not a problem. Why not? Shatzitz miratza ala tamei. We know we have a rule that the tzitz is miratza on tamei, so that's a psul that wouldn't impact the rest of the carbon. But v'alechem pasul, but the lechem is pasul. Nizrek adam. What if the dam was already spritzed and then one of the breads became tamei? So then tarei min atar ala tamei. The bread that you give to the kohen will be one of the tahar breads. If you hold that once an animal is shechted, all of the components are connected to it, so its breads are now connected to it and cannot be replaced. Well, then kivan de huzkiku zelozeh b'shchita. Once the shchita occurred, and now this lechem is designated as a part of the carbon, well then ifsul lay lechem. The lechem being impossible in all these cases were after the shchita, but before the zrika. What does the brisa say? The lechem is puzzle, but the carbon is kosher. V'dei nidra layotza. Why is the carbon kosher? Tifsol nami taita. The whole carbon should be puzzle. Zok Rashi v'loy sizruk afilu shaloi l'shma. You know why? You know why? Because now it's one thing. We already said zika means if one part of the carbon becomes puzzle, they're all puzzle. So how could you now separate and say that the lechem is puzzle, but the carbon will be kosher as a shlomim? The carbon should be puzzle as well. And for the Gemara, shani toida the rachmana karya shlomim. Toida is different because the toida is in fact a carbon shlomim. Ma shlomim craving below lechem, av toida craving below lechem. Since the Torah does designate the Torah is a shlomim, because the Torah says havach toidas shlomov, so the Torah refers to the carbon Torah as if it is a carbon shlomim. Therefore, it's unique that even though its breads became puzzle, it doesn't disqualify the whole carbon because it still retains its identity as a carbon shlomim. As Rashi says, Rachmana koy shlomim toidas shlomov mashma da'afal bi shoysa toida b'shas lachma. Even though if it has lechem, it's a taida, but chayzeres liyay shlomim b'loy lechem. But if it's lechem becomes possible for whatever reason, such as yoytze, such as nifras, such as tamei, it could just morph into a shlomim. But the kivsei atzeres, where we're saying the shchita connects them, and once the breads go missing, it'll pass the carbon and vice versa. Kivsei atzeres im lachma. Kari shlomim, it's only considered a shlomim with the lechem, and now this special designation as a shlomim applies to a carbon taida, but not to the kivsei atzeres. This kari shlomim is a little difficult. You can see there's a oisir from the Shehita. There are those who changed the girsa and said that the balt it's a shalmeit sibor, it's different. But whatever the case is, you can ask me a kasha from the carbon taida, where even after the shechita, the lechem will not pass the carbon, to the kivsei atzeres, where there after the shechita, in fact, anything that happens to the lechem would pass the carbon, and vice versa. Amar b'Yirmiyah, im tim taloymer tenufa oisazika. On the tzad of the shayla that we asked at the beginning of the daf today, can tenufa make the zika by the shtei lechem? What would be if after the tenufa was made, avat halechem? If the lechem went missing. Now, if they're connected, the question is, avad halechem avdu kvasim. The animals are puzzle now, and avdu kvasim avad halechem. They're tethered to each other, and therefore, if anything goes missing or becomes puzzle, the whole thing is puzzle, and you have to start over again. But vimdim zaloymer tenufa eino isazika, then hevi lechem ukvasim v'hunfu. What happens if you brought the lechem and the kvasim and you made the tenufa, and after the tenufa, but before the shechita of the avat halechem, the lechem is missing. So what do? You just replace the lechem. Vehevi lechem achar. So the question is, oiseh lechem tenufa or eniton tenufa? You've already done tenufa on the animal together with the lechem that went missing. Now you have to replace it and get a new set of lechem. Do you need to do tenufa on the new set of lechem or not? Zok the Gemara, of the kvasim loyti vayalach devade by tenufa. If the animals went missing and you have to replace those animals after the tenufa, for sure the animals will require another tenufa. Kisi vayalach, our only shaila is over lechem. If the lechem went missing, do you need to make another tenufa? Now, why is it so pasha to the Gemara that you would for sure need to make a tenufa on the replacement animals, yet the Gemara is clearing if you need to make a tenufa on the replacement bread? So let's see if Rashi could give us a clue. Boy tenufa kvasam acherim bo tenufa l'divra koil. Everybody holds in tenufa. Why? The matir in hain. They are the matir. We know that when you shech the carbon and you make this rikas adam, that's matir everything. So they will for sure need a tenufa. A and B is va'oy de behu ksiv tenufa v'heiniv oisam hakoyin. The Torah is directly referring to the behemoths. So the whole shayla is over alechem. Now va'aliba de benanis loy tibaylach the amar kvasim ikar. Benanis told us already on Amar Aleph that the kvasim are ma'akev the lechem, but the lechem aren't ma'akev the kvasim. So according to Benanis, for sure you wouldn't have to make a tenufa on the lechem because you don't even need a lechem. The carbon is crushed without the lechem. The whole shayla is according to Rabbi Kiva Damar lechem ikar. He says that without the lechem, the whole carbon is possible. So therefore, the lechem is much more significant. So therefore, we would clear the following shayla. If the lechem went missing after the tenufa, and you replace the lechem with a new lechem, do you need to make tenufa on the new lechem? Kiv on the lechem ikar by tenufa, since the lechem is the main part. V'haraya, it's ma'akiv, and only it's ma'akiv, therefore you should need to make a tenufa on the new replacement lechem. Ideal makiv in the matir in the day, kvasim nenu, or maybe even though the lechem is ma'akiv, but the matir of the lechem is still the kvasim once they're shechted and the dam is nizrak. So therefore, maybe like tzarech tenufa, maybe the bread will not require a tenufa, and the Gemara remains with a teku. Gewaltig. Zog the Gemara weiter. Omar le Abaye le Rava. Abaye asked Rava the following question. My shna shnei kvasim the mekachi lechem uma'akfi. By the shtei lechem, we say that the two sheep are mekadesh to lechem, and therefore once they're mekadesh to lechem, they're ma'akiv one another. Rashi's uma'akvi imchilsk guzel b'shchita could amar b'yechan lo'il. Right? We said once they're combined in a carbon. How do they become combined and crystallized? The shchita has occurred. But why is it that they're ma'akiv each other? Umayshna shiva kvasim upar ve'elim deloy mekachi lechem ve'loy ma'akvi. In the parasha of Shavuos, there's a whole list of karbonas that the Torah says you have to bring. There's Purim, there's Elim, then there's 7 kvasim, twice, once in Parshas Vayikra, once in Vamidbar, and then you have the 2 additional kvasim that we've linked to the Shtei Alechem. Why is only these 2 karbonas, these 2 kvasim linked to the Shtei Alechem? Why don't we link all of the karbonas that are mandated on Shavuos to be linked to the Shtei Alechem? That is the question. They're all required. So Zog to Gemara, Ma'ishna Shiva Kvasim Upar Ve'elim Deloy Mekachi Lechem and Ve'loy Ma'akvi. And let's just review the psukim, because if you remember yesterday, we were discussing the psukim in Bamidbar and the psukim in Vayikra that tell us the karbonos that have to be brought. So if we look at the karbonos of Vayikra, it says, V'kraftem ala lechem shivas kvasim tamimim b'nei shana, par echad, and elim shnayim. And then shnei kvasim. So why are we just combining these shnei kvasim to the breads? What about all the other karbonos in the pasuk that the pasuk links to the breads? The same thing is in Bamidbar. V'kraftim oila l'rich nichayach l'Shem parim b'nei bakar shnayim ayil echad shiva kvasim b'nei shana. And then it talks about the shtei alechem and says v'henev hakayin noisa about Jamaica. So why is it that we're not connecting all the karbonos of Shavuos to the breads? Why are we just hand picking the two kvasim? They should all be connected. Zog to Gemara. Second. Amalei by the Rava, Maishna Shnei Kvasim, Upar Ve'elim, the Loi Mekachi Lechem V'Loi Makvi. Why is it that they're different in the Shnei Kvasim? Amalei, Rava answered as follows: Hoil v'Huska Kuzel Tenufa. You know why these two Kvasim are special? Because the only things that you make Tenufa together with the bread on are those two Kvasim. So you see the Torah carved out those two kvasim to have a special relationship with the lachmi, the shtei lechem, because the Torah puts them together in the tenufa. Freit the Gemara, by the carbon taida there is no tenufa at all, and the shechita mekacha umaakva. So you see, it's not the tenufa that crystallizes this combined carbon with meat and bread. It's the shechita. So if that's the case, why not all these other karbanos as well? Ela ketoida, ma toida shlomim. Just like the toida is a carbon shlomim, av hachanami shlomim. So too, all the other karbanos, they're oilos. The carbon that's a shlomim are these two sheep, and that's why, like toida, we're combining the carbon shlomim with the breads, but not a carbon oida with the breads. Freit Gemara, mi dummy, you can't make that comparison to a carbon taida, because if the carbon taida had oilers and shlomims and only the shlomim gets connected to the breads, I would accept that. But hasam lekas v'achamachrini b'hadei, by a taida there are no other karbonos to say should be connected in one unit with the breads. But hacha the ikas v'achamachrini b'hadei, here on Shavuos where we have parim and elim and shiva kvasim, in addition to the shlomim, lik the shuhani v'hani. Again, it should all be one unit. Zok Gemara. Okay, so we'll bring a raya from a different type of carbon. Ela ka'ayil nozir. We know that the nozir in his tahara process has to bring an ayil, and it also comes with lechem, and it's connected to the lechem. But the nozir brings many karbonos in addition to the ayil. So that is similar to the karbonos on Shavuos, where there are certain karbonos that are connected to the breads and the others that aren't. So ma'ayil nazir, afagav dikas v'acham achrini, even though there are other karbonos as part of his process, it's shalomim hu de mekachi, midi achrini loy. It's only the shlomim, the ayil nazir, which is like a shlomim, it's only the ayil nazir that's connected to the bread, but not others. Hachanami loishna. So too, by the shtei lechem, what carbon do you connect to breads? The carbon shlomim, which are the two kvasim. Frak Gemara, it's a very nice pshat, but v'hasam inolam. How do you know that about the ayil nazir gufa? The breads are only linked to the ayil nazir and not to the other karbonis brought by the nazir. The Tanya, it says v'esa ayil yase zevach shlomim lashem al sal hamatzos. Malamed, it teaches us shasal bo choyvel ayil ushchitas ayil mekachon. It's the sal hamatzos that comes choyvel to the ayil. That's the one that's connected, and that's the item that becomes kadosh when the ayil is shechted. Lefichach, therefore, shachtoi shaloi l'shmoi. If the shchitas ayil was done shaloi l'shmoi, loy kitchu alachem. Meaning, even if other karbonos were shechted l'shmoi, it doesn't matter. It's only the shechita of the ayil that will have an impact on the bread. As Rashi says, lefichach the shchitas ayil mekachen, therefore shechted l'ayil shaloi l'shmoi, lo kiddush alechem tichsiv zevach shlomim al salamatzos. Is a vichose l'shem shlomim, then mekadosh es asal v'loy loy. And therefore, we learn from Ayil Nazir to Kifse Etzeres that it's the carbon shlomim that activates the bread. Tanu Rabbanan. Shtei alechem abois b'fnei atzman. What if you had a scenario where you only bring the shtei alechem? Who holds like that? Rabbi Kiva. Because Rabbi Kiva holds that the lechem is ma'akiv the basar, but the basar is not ma'akiv the lechem. And therefore you could bring the lechem by itself. As Rashi says, al libu de Rabbi Kiva, damar kvasim ein ma'akvinis alechem. So what if you didn't have kvasim and you were bringing the lechem by itself? The halacha is yunfu, you make tenufa on them as dictated by the Torah, but you don't eat them. Utu ubar tzurasan, you let them become noisar, v'yetzel v'eisas reifa. Fact the Gemara, I don't understand why. Manashach, ila chila asyan, if you're bringing them to eat because you don't need a matir, because if you're going to claim that they're independent, as Rabbi Kiva says, they're independent of the carbon, so therefore they should be mutter b'achila, lichlinu. Why destroy them? Let the kohen eat them. They should be able to be eaten. Ilis reifa asyan, and if you're telling me that l'chatchila they have to be burnt because they're not going to have this rikas adam, well then l'srefinu la'alter, burn them right away after you make the tenufa. There's no reason to wait till they become nicer. Lama lahu ibutzura. Why do you have to wait until they become nicer? Either their avodah is achila or their avodah is reifa. But there's no need to wait until they become nicer. Omar Rabba lo olam lachila asan. Really, me'ikar, then you should be able to eat them. According to Rabbi Kiva, they're independent of the carbon. You should be able to eat them. So why don't we let the kohen eat the shtei alechem? So gzeira shema yizdamnu lehen kvasim l'shon haba. What if next year they have the kvasim, and next year they're not allowed to eat the breads until after the Shehita and Zrika. But they'll say, V'yarmu ishtaket mi lo yachalnu lechem b'lo kvasim. Last year we didn't even have kvasim, yet we ate the shtei alechem. So now, even though we have kvasim, why are they linked? We'll eat the bread even before we process the kvasim. Achshav nami nechel. But I'm sorry. This is not b'di'evet. This is there's an issue to eat the kachim. It's like eating basar before there's rikas adam. The inu, these people lo yodi, they don't know the ishtakid have a kvasim. There were no kvasim last year, so therefore inu sharya nafshayu, they become mutter on their own once you do the tenufa. But hashta dika kvasim. But this year that we have kvasim mu desharya lahu, and therefore we say don't eat them at all. But since we're saying don't eat them, you're not allowed to burn a perfectly good carbon. Therefore, you have to wait till it becomes nicer, and then you could burn it. Amar Rabba, we know amin Allah. How do I know this halacha? Rashi says, we know amin Allah d'lachila asyan. How do I know in Rabbi Kiva that if you end up bringing the lechem without the animals, you'd be allowed to eat the shtei lechem perfectly? Titanan, Rabbi Yehuda. Heid ben Buchi b'Yavna. We learned this sugya earlier. Ben Buchi said, Eidus and Yavna, Kol kohen sheshoikel. If a kohen decides to participate in the shkolim, really there's no chiyuv on the kohen to participate in the shkolim. Again, the Lublin strikes again, it's the time of year of shkolim. If a kohen decides to participate, even though it's voluntary, it's not an avera. And if you remember, we learned he has to be mevatel his money to the tibur. Otherwise, there's a problem of personal money mixed in to the money of the tibur. Like here, I disagree with you. Avada kohen is mechuyev in shkolim. Ela kol kohen she'eino shoykel chayte. A kohen has the same responsibility as any other member of Klal Yisrael to contribute to the shkolim. Ela she'akohanim darshan mikras alatzman. The kohanim, since they're negei b'davar, they falsely and incorrectly darshan a pasuk that's misguiding them and misleading them to think that they don't have to contribute to the shkolim. And what mistaken cheshbon did they make? They learned in the pasuk, it says, "V'chol minchas kohen kolol tiyeh, lo yisayachel." If a kohen brings a mincha, unlike everybody else's mincha, where only a kamitz is placed on the mizbeach and the rest is eaten by the kohanim, a kohen who brings a mincha, the entire kohen is placed on the mizbeach. So if that's the case, hoyol the omer ushtei alechem v'lechem aponim shalonuhein, the kohen is going to say to himself, the carbon omer, which is our subject, The carbon is Pesach. I'm sorry. The shtei alechem is our subject, and the lechem apodim, which is done on a weekly basis, it's a mincha. Shalom. If we're contributing, so we also have a chelik in these menachos, yet they're eaten by the kohanim. Heich nechalon. How could the kohanim eat them? So therefore, it must be that we don't contribute to the shkolim. Now let's drill down and analyze what's going on over here. Hani shtei alechem heichedami. What exactly is the shtei alechem that we're talking about? Ilema bevois imasevach. If they're coming together with an animal, atu toida v'lachma mi loy menadvi kohanim v'achlilu. I don't understand what the kohen's problem is. If it's like every other korban toida, where you bring a korban together with lechem, they didn't have any problem with bringing a toida. They had a problem with the oimer shtei lechem and lechem aponim. But they bring korban toidas all the time. And the bread portion, which is also a little bit like a mincha, the bread portion gets eaten. It says v'chol mincha is kohen kol here. So obviously that's only by a regular straight mincha. But by a korban that's accompanied with an animal, like a korban toida, of course, the kohen eats it. So oibazoi, if we're talking about the shtei alechem that's accompanying an animal, what's the kohen's problem? Why shouldn't the kohen be able to eat it? So it must be the type of shtei alechem that this kohen is mistakenly referring to, elalah bebois b'fnei atzman. He's referring to a scenario where if there was no animals that year and they only brought shtei alechem, there it would be a mincha straight up mincha, and there the kohen would say, how can you eat it? The katani heich nechalon. And what does the kohen ask? How could they be eaten? Al malachilasan. So you have a pure raya that the shtei alechem, if they're brought, even though they're not accompanied by behemoths, nevertheless they're still eaten. So Rabbi says, I have a beautiful raya. I have a raya that shtei alechem, if you bring it without the korban, it would still be eaten. Amalei Abaye, la'olam bevois imasevach. Abaye wants to say no. The kohen's question about the shtei alechem, it's bevois imasevach. Ayu the kakash shaloch mitoida v'lachma. Are you going to ask me a question? Why is it any different than the toida, where the kohen doesn't have a problem with the fact that the kohen can eat the breads? The gemara lachme toida loy ikru mincha. Shtei alechem ikru mincha. The lachme toida are different. They're not ever referred to by the Torah as a mincha. It's only the mincha of a kohen that's called here. Stam breads matched with a korban like toida, that doesn't qualify as a mincha. Where does it say by shtei alechem that it's like a mincha? Shenemar, it says in the pasuk, ba'akrivchem mincha chadosh al Hashem. Okay, Rabbi Yosef Amar la'olam l'shreifa ashen. I disagree with Rabbah, and I hold that avada right away when you bring the shtei alechem, if there's no kvasim, they should be burnt right away. They can never be eaten. So why do we wait until they become noiser? Burn them right away. The hanyu time with the loy sarfinon. You know why we don't burn them right away? Lefisha ain't sarf and kachim b'yom tov. You never burn kachim that are posel on Yom Tov, so you have to wait until after Yom Tov. Amar lo Abaye, mi dami. You can't compare this to kachim that became posel, because this bread is not posel. Its avoida is bisreifa. Hazam lav mitzvasam bekach. If that's not its mitzvah became posel, yes, you don't do that on Yom Tov. You wait. But hacha de mitzvasam bekach. Here, that's the lechatchila. That's the avoida to be done with these breads, unaccompanied breads. The avoida is shreifa. So of course you do that. And I'll bring you a raya. L'shrefinu midi dehava apar useir shel Yom Kippurim. What do you do with the par and shir of Yom Kippurim? You also burn it on Yom Kippur. You don't burn kachim on Yom Kippur. You don't burn kachim that became posel. But if that's the prescribed avada, you do it on Yom Tov. Ella Amar Rabbi Yosef, you know why you have to wait until it's ubar chirasan? Is also a gzeira. Shema yizdamnu lem kvasim la'achamikan. What's going to happen is, if you burn it on Yom Tov, what if an hour later kvasim come? They show up. So now you burned it for nothing. You were really supposed to save it. So therefore, you shouldn't burn it until the day is over. But the Gemara is going to ask, the day is over, burn it right away. Why wait till the next morning till it's nicer? I understand until the Talmud Shalbein Arbaim, which is the zone in which you can be makriv the korban. There you won't burn the lechem because you want to wait. Maybe you'll find animals. But levatzarachi, the moment you bring the Talmud Shalbein Arbaim and the Beis Hamikdash processing plant is closed for the day, lisrafinu, burn the breads right away. Why wait till the next morning till they become nicer? The katani tzuras hakravasam. It doesn't really mean wait till they become nicer. Wait till the next morning. It just means wait till you can no longer be makar of a carbon. Rav Amar Lachilasan. Rav is going back to the original pshat that really Mikradin you should be able to eat these breads, and it's only a gzeira that we don't eat them. Ugzeira, mishum the Rabbah, and there's a gzeira of Rabbah, which Rabbah told us that we're afraid if we let you eat them, then next year when there are animals available, people might eat the shtei alechem before the animals. And the Rabbah wanted to bring a raya. Rabbah wanted to bring a raya that you can eat the shtei alechem even without animals, and he brought a raya from the whole discussion of the kohanim who want to bring a raya that they don't have to contribute to the shkolim. However, Rava says v'lav mitemeh. He has a different raya that you can eat the shtei alechem even though they're not accompanied by an animal. Elamikra. V'yomer Rava mina aminallah. How do I know it? T'chsiv mi moish v'yiseichem taviu lechem tenufa bikurim lashem. That's what the Torah says in reference to the bikurim that are brought. And we darshan ma bikurim bifnei atzmon. Just like bikurim, you eat by itself. It's not burnt on the mizbeach. It's not linked to a carbon. Av shtei alechem bifnei atzmon. So too, you can eat the shtei alechem by itself. It doesn't need to be brought together. It doesn't need to be brought together with an animal. Umina, and you can learn more from bikurim. Ma bikurim la'achila, av shtei alechem nami la'achila. The bikurim are not accompanied by anything, and they're eaten. So too the shtei alechem, even though they're not accompanied by anything, they can be eaten. It's because of a hekesh that we learn to compare bikurim to bikurim, because it says in the pasuk again, referencing the shtei alechem, mimosh v'seichem tiviu lechem tenufa shtaim shnei esranim selos tiyan chamis evena bikurim l'Hashem. So the Torah refers to the shtei alechem using the word bikurim, which gives it characteristics of bikurim: A, that it's brought without a carbon, and B, it can be eaten. Okay, Baruch Hashem, we were zeicha to finish Daf Mem Vav, and tomorrow we will learn Daf Mem Zayin.